So I would like to kick off and say thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on uh, energy and transition, creating sustainable legacies. So we hope to discuss opportunities and challenges around shared benefits and contributing to sustainable legacies through this discussion. My name is Jennifer McDonald. I'm a Principal Communications and Engagement Consultant with WSP, and it's my pleasure to be the facilitator at today's webinar. I'm joined by panellists Martine Holberton, Kerry O'Brien, and Carla Martinez, who I will formally introduce to you shortly. But first, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the Kaurna people as the traditional owners of the land that I am speaking from, and acknowledge their continuing connection to culture, land, sea, and sky, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And as we're all joining the webinar from across Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the countries that we're all respectively on today. And we welcome you to pop into the chat the land that you are coming from. So thank you. I'd like to cover some housekeeping stuff now. We hope that you're comfortable, that you've got yourself some water and a cup of tea and can settle in for a great conversation with our panellists and ourselves. As part of today's webinar, there will be interactive discussion amongst the panellists on the topic. And because there's so many people that are on the call, we're going to turn your cameras and microphones off automatically, but we really do want your active participation. We have some polls, and of course you will have the opportunity to submit questions into our chat there, and we will get to those later in the discussion. But your engagement really is important. I was reflecting last night that when I first started working in this space, I was working on some of the very early wind farms that we did in South Australia, and at that time there was much discussion about shared benefits. And to think that we are together today, some years later, with, I think we got over 400 registrations to attend this with people across the industry. So it's really very, very exciting. So thank you for making the time. And we also just acknowledge and thank anyone who has put their questions already through the registration page. And we will send everyone a copy of the recording after the webinar so that you can reflect on it if you would like to. So it's now time to formally introduce our expert panellists. I'll keep the introductions brief, and we've put their bios into the chat so that you can have a read later. But we welcome Martine Holberton, who is the Director of Renewable Energy at the Energy Charter. Hello, Martine. Thank you. Then we have Kerry O'Brien, who is the Community and Social Performance Team Lead at Powerlink Queensland. Thank you, Kerry. And we have Carla Martinez, who is the Principal Community and Social Performance Consultant at WSP Australia. Hi, Carla. Next, we'll just look at a slide, if that's okay. Thank you. So to kick off the discussion, we wanted to get your audience participation and involvement. So as part of the Energy Infrastructure Commissioner's community engagement review, they surveyed communities about whether they believed the local community would benefit from large-scale renewable energy projects. And those surveyed were largely from landowners and community in close proximity to a proposed or existing renewable energy project or infrastructure. Just wanted you to note that 20% were hosts or could be hosts, and 63% lived within 5 kilometres of a proposed or existing renewable energy project or infrastructure. And we can see in the results there that many of the groups surveyed didn't have confidence that they would necessarily see benefits. Yet community acceptance is an absolute cornerstone and a key enabler for the energy transition. And we want to deliver lasting benefits from the energy transition. So given that we know communities will benefit as part of this transition as investment and economic opportunities arise, but there is this community concern, before I open to the panel, I'd really like to hear from our audience about your experience on projects and when you've been working with communities. And we're going to do this by launching a poll. And the question that we'll be asking on the poll is, why do you think communities don't believe or may not believe that they'll benefit from renewable energy projects? If you could grab the QR code there and give us your feedback. It'd be very interesting to see what you think from your experience. Just giving a few minutes for people to pop in their thoughts. So I think that's probably close to what we're going to get, perhaps. So looking at that, it's interesting that we're seeing 36% are concerned about the lack of trust, lack of information, and a sense of inequity of distribution of impacts and benefits, less so around high expectations of benefits. But interesting. I'm sure we can flesh this out and it will come out in our discussion as well. So I might actually, with those poll results in mind, I might start with a quick fire challenge to each member of our panel, and in one sentence ask you, reflecting on the survey results in the community engagement review that we've just discussed and the poll results, what's your take on community disbelief around benefits rolling to them from renewable projects? If I could perhaps ask Kerry to kick us off.
Thanks, Jen. So off the cuff, I really think we need to shift from a project-centric view. So we're not all working independently or in isolation, but collaboratively and collectively. So we consider those sustainable regional development opportunities for communities. What that would entail is probably a shift from looking at financial return on investments and actually ask ourselves, what does responsible and successful investment look like that leads to that social return on investment, so not financial? And how do we change the view from short-term to a long-term lens?
Thanks, Kerry. Carla, can I get your thoughts on my question?
Yes, to me, it is really interesting. And I think that there is some of those factors that are interrelated. To me, based on my experience, spending time with landholders, with community representatives, and also conducting research, is the inequity of distribution of impacts and benefits one of the factors that dominates. And that experience of inequity of distribution of impacts has an influence on trust as well. My sense is that it's not coming from disbelief is not coming from lack of information. It's mostly from their own experience of impacts and benefits, and then that becomes part of the trust as well.
Nicely summarised, Carla. Very interesting, yeah. I'd like to ask Martine now as well what her thoughts are.
Sure, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, look, I echo both of those comments, but yeah, I think there might be an opportunity for us to really go back to the drawing board a little bit at the moment, because there's heaps and heaps of evidence that's come out very recently through various research produced by Realliance and the Regional Australia Institute, and also based off my first-hand experiences out in regional Australia. We're combating, whilst everyone will experience this transition uniquely, ultimately we are coming up against a hell of a lot of misinformation and disinformation, and it's really hard to combat that. Well, particularly I would say there hasn't been huge amounts of efforts to fill that void or that information gap. So I would say that there's an opportunity there to actually get out and do some ground up information and awareness raising to try and correct the narrative a bit.
Thank you all. It's interesting perspectives about the linkages between some of these things, and also your perspectives there, Martine, about how to reframe information and get it out there. Thanks, panelists. I might just keep moving now to sort of our first topic that we're going to talk about, which is around the fact that we want benefits to endure beyond the construction phase and into the project life cycle. And as we about to do this unprecedented infrastructure build to support the energy transition, it really is only possible to achieve this if we can have our community's support. Community benefits are often delivered during the construction phase in the form of social investment, training, employment, local procurement. So as more renewable energy projects proposals turn up in regional areas, as this progresses. Kerry, can I ask you to share a little bit about how PowerLink is shaping community benefits programs that promote benefits beyond the construction phase?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. As you just mentioned, we're in a rapidly changing energy environment, so we really do need to start thinking of different ways to delivering community benefits and programs associated with that. And when we're doing that, we're just starting to think of projects not necessarily as a construction phase activity, but a whole of life cycle phase for those assets. But ultimately, we're ending up in a maintenance and operations space, and that's recognising that these assets or the infrastructure projects are multi-generational and they're going to be in communities and working with communities for a long time. So what we want to focus then is outcomes, because that's a longer term look rather than outputs. Outputs will deliver outcomes, and that leads to a lot more enduring community benefits realisation. So we're really looking at a responsible community investment approach that's designed to support sustainable communities and also the economic development for communities. And what we're developing at PowerLink is a 3 pillars approach to our community investment. So our main themes are about sustainable communities and that economic development. Some focus areas in there will include community resilience, social capacity and environment. And then under economic, we're looking at some of those items you just mentioned, like local purchasing skills, training and employment, etc. But the way we can structure it through a pillared approach is you've got those grassroots, hyper-local approaches, which often come through small grants programs, and they have a broad reach and they can be turned around or adapted pretty quickly. And they actually give you instant reach to community members. We're then moving in through that community benefits and the resilience piece. And what that's really working on is considering investing in people, investing in the capacity of people, and investing in resilience in communities so they can participate in some of the activities or projects that are going to come through the uplift in activities. And without those two, you can't actually get through to that economic and regional development space, which is that longer term view. And again, it can't be delivered just in construction. So these projects that are coming through the energy transition are going to take many years just to develop. And in that development and inquiry space is the best time to start looking at the planning for social and community investment. While I'm planning for projects, I'm also planning for investing in these communities so that when you get to construction, you've got really well-informed community investment and benefits products or activities or projects to deliver. And you've spent then potentially 5 to 10 years working on things that lead to legacy creation. And that's not just investing in physical infrastructure, but investing in people and then also investing in some of the social infrastructure as well. So it's not necessarily project-centric. PowerLink's a business of many projects, and we just need to understand we're also overlapping in time and place. And so if we look at one project by itself, there might be another one next door. If we can't work collaboratively together, we end up with a very ad hoc piece of investment, and then that leads to some of the inequity or the gaps or the over-consultation and fatigue. And I think to keep a track of all of that, because it's enduring over time, we need to make sure we keep monitoring, measuring and reporting and understanding what some of those social outcomes are. And that leads to how do we measure legacy? That's an interesting question to think about as well. And then we've got to keep refining our investment activities and opportunities so that we end up in a space that's got continual improvement to provide continual benefit for our communities.
Thanks, Kerry. It's very interesting. I was curious about resilience. Can you elaborate at all on what that looks like?
Yeah, resilience has many factors. So the two main arms of resilience is there's a coping mechanism and there's an adaptation mechanism. And so when something like a shock, whether it's a positive or negative, comes through, you can cope, and then how do you adapt? And to be able to adapt, you need that resilience built in, and that comes through leadership, sense of place, sense of belonging, community. I guess the fabric of community is quite strong. And so if you start working on enabling communities to participate or get some leadership opportunities, create those close ties within communities, you actually start building towards some natural resilience so that when the shock comes along or an event comes along, and this could be a disaster event as well, you actually have your natural inbuilt resilience there. So you're not starting from, I can't do anything but just cope. So you're working, how do I adapt? How do I take on all these opportunities as well? And how do I leverage the community investment or community benefits to help build that resilience within my community?
Lovely, thank you. Martine, I might ask you a question, which is from your perspective, from the Energy Charter, how can developers better understand and support community development goals, do you think?
Look, I think I'll speak both from the perspective of coming from industry and also working within the Energy Charter. And I just want to make a note that I'm always conscious that when we talk about supporting communities, I sort of First Nations are very much interlinked in that. So so when I'm speaking about communities, I'm sort of the whole lot. And there's different approaches that are obviously required across each stakeholder segment group. But yeah, I just wanted to preface that. Look, I'd say that it's imperative that developers obviously they need to be engaging as early as possible and identify areas where where they can work with communities so they can feel empowered and part of the process. And I think that's even more so pertinent at the moment with the rollout of renewable energy zones. And that then highlights the need that developers need to be working together, and that's across transmission as well. Because as far as community is concerned, the two are one and the same. Can't have one without the other. So that need for a collaborative and cooperative approach is essential. But then I think, you know, the earlier that you are engaging, the better you are to understand how to address community needs and then improve and refine that through designing with them. So one of the things that we're working on at the moment, and you can see it happening actually across Australia, but at the Energy Charter, we're co-leading a collaboration framework with the Wimmera Southern Valley Development Group, and they, along with 12 energy companies, we're working to create a genuine partnership that ensures that the region can genuinely benefit from the transformation that's happening with them, and so it's not happening to them rather. And I think it's, you know, at the moment we're really getting to work early on that and defining what year one activity will look like and how we can sort of address some of these concerns that the communities are feeling at the moment. And that will set the agenda for what we co-design in terms of addressing some of those concerns as well. Ultimately, I think the fact that, you know, we're tethering to a cleaner and more sustainable energy source is just, it's an opportunity for all of us to participate in designing what a sustainable future looks like for all of us, really.
Fabulous. Sounds very interesting, the work that you just used as an example. Thank you. And I guess that ties to the challenges. I've heard both Kerry and Carla and Martine talk about, you know, challenges around collaborating and working together. Let's talk a little bit more maybe about the challenges and the gaps with community benefit programs, and acknowledge that that's quite challenging. So while benefit sharing programs can contribute to bringing equity into the distribution of benefits and impacts during the energy transition, I'd really like to have a look more closely at the key challenges of delivering these programs. Carla, I know that you have a great interest and have done quite a lot of extensive research into the current benefit sharing programs that are around. Would you be able to share a little bit of what you've found out?
Yes, absolutely. So last year we conducted some research on the benefit sharing landscape for renewable energy projects in Australia. This was a piece of work that was commissioned by Origin Energy. But since then, we have also complemented this research with additional sources of information when delivering other work for other clients in the energy infrastructure sector as well. So we review for this original piece of research about 17 different guidelines and frameworks, both from industry and government sources, as well as 45 renewable energy projects across Australia to see what approaches are these industries putting in place, and what is all these guidelines as well telling us to do. And I guess one of the challenges and a question that we often get asked as consultants is around budget allocation. So I thought that I'll share some of the key findings on this specific aspect of benefit sharing. So we found that there is two main approaches that are currently being adopted by industry when allocating budget for benefit sharing. The first one is based on energy generation. So this is allocating a dollar amount per megawatt generated per year. And this usually ranges between $500 to $1,500 per megawatt per year. And this is specifically the case for wind farms. We have found that, for example, the Clean Energy Council guideline proposes and advocates for the use of this approach, and this is mostly because it provides consistency and transparency about budget allocation. However, when contrasting 45 renewable energy projects, we couldn't really find that there was a clear pattern or commonalities about how this budget is being allocated. And this perhaps speak about this second approach that we found that is more focused into the local context and also the complexity of the project. So this is the budget for benefit sharing is allocated looking at the project impacts as well as the socioeconomic characteristics of the community. And this perhaps speaks a little bit of what Kerry was just suggesting in terms of a framework. Now, regardless of how the budget is defined, we also found some very interesting findings in terms of how the funding is distributed and delivered. So one of those key learnings was about establishing different tiers of investment. This is that instead of allocating all your benefit sharing budget to a small grants and sponsorship programs, for example, is that there is a larger proportion that it would be desirable that it gets allocated for this longer term contribution. However, it is acknowledged that a small funding can also contribute to that community cohesion and that social resilience. So it's not all about investing on infrastructure. There is also other type of programs that can be delivered to obtain longer term benefits for the communities. We also found that allocating a budget for the administration is something that it was recognized as be missing in most of these benefit sharing programs. So there will be a commitment for the delivery of certain programs, but there was not allocation of a budget or human resources as well for the design of the program, for the planning and administration, and also, as Kerry mentioned, for the monitoring and evaluation of the program itself. So that's another important finding in this landscape. And finally, it was another key finding is around the benefit sharing, the timing of the implementation of the delivery of these benefit sharing programs. So we found that most of these programs were delivered during operation and only a few during construction. However, there are some programs around training and business development that are delivered, and when you're starting early, that can ensure that communities or support that communities can leverage from the benefits of projects, so employment and business development. If developers are able to roll out those programs early on, then communities will also have a better opportunity of benefiting from the benefits of a project.
Great, thanks, Carla. We could get a question: were greenfield transmission projects included in the research around benefit sharing?
No, so those ones were only renewable energy in terms of solar and wind farms.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Tom. Very interesting, isn't it? Yeah, thanks, Carla. That was a great piece of information. So I might turn to you, Martine, at this point and say, from your perspective, what's the role of state and local government in benefit sharing and community investment programs? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think ultimately every state is different, so we're operating in under different legislative conditions in each state. and each project is different in scale and nature too. But reiterate the fact that it's important for developers to build relationships with councils early on, and every council is different, and some are trusted by their constituents, and some are not, and some are really collegiate, and some are not. And so it's important to sort of identify barriers for them to be able to assess and even support a project, and also understand whether their community development plans address the needs of the impacted community, because I think oftentimes in council areas where amalgamation has occurred, you may have a project, an area where there's a lot of project activity that's a long way away from the hub of the LGA, where perhaps a lot of funding is sort of tends to be allocated to. So I would say that in terms of the role of local government, I don't know if they're always the most appropriate administrator of community investment programs, but they should, hopefully I think the role is for them to be able to fill that role. But we shouldn't underestimate the ability for developers to set up the administration and governance of these sorts of programs that they co-design, of course, with community and perhaps with other developers too. Sometimes that can avoid, they can get things done a lot faster and not get stuck down in too much bureaucracy and governance, but still obviously important for them to have the governance models in place. And I think it's about identifying then community groups, development groups, whether they're, chambers of commerce or progress associations that may be able to fill that role because they're already doing that work in their community, and they are constantly, addressing and rethinking what the community's needs are. And then in terms of any projects in relation to a res, I think state government's role is to identify those place-based solutions for fund administration, again, that are co-designed with communities. Otherwise, you do get that duplication. I think it's important to ensure that the communities, and this is what we continue to hear, that if they're directly impacted by these projects, they're going to want to see the funding trickle down into their region. And that's why I'd say for developers using that construction phase of benefit sharing, for lack of a better term, I'm not sure if I'm still crash on it, but it's a good period to actually pilot programs to then create a base case for whether they should be continued under operational funding, which actually, I've sort of done it previously, and it's proven to be, quite positive, and that's based off filling a gap that the communities have identified. Hopefully that. I was going to mention that the Hayshire Council work that's recently come out, because I think that's sort of an important thing to point to, where you have a local government that has just straight up addressed the fact that if you're going to come and do business here, well, this is what you can help us with. So some of these more sophisticated councils, and if they are collegiate and they are sort of working well together, then you can get these plans that, if you're a developer going into the Hayshire Council area, you will know, okay, well, alone we can tackle this, but together with other developers we can tackle this, and we can plan for these. And I think that early view on what they can get started on in construction is really, really helpful, because you can really test and try things in that phase.
That's terrific. Thanks, Martine. That's interesting about the Hay Council, like you say, makes it easier. I was just going to remind people they can put questions in the chat, and I'll work on those. There are a couple there that maybe I can get the group to just discuss a little bit. There's one which was a little bit around information, and our participant that's joined the webinar said that the community can be a little bit detached from the conversation around addressing climate change. Do you agree, and do you think as engagement professionals we actually need to link this a little bit more? Would it help communities understanding the benefits? For example, we know that farmers are really concerned in general about the legacy for their future generations. So I'm not sure Kerry or Martine or Carla, would one of you like to comment around that?
I would just quickly say that absolutely there's a need to link this, and this comes back to responsible, sustainable development too. You know, like we can't. I think we're facing a green dilemma of having to transition to a clean energy economy. At the same time, we're facing the collapse of biodiversity, which absolutely underpins our existence, and it's a really tricky balancing act to be in at the moment. And that's why I think it's really important. And we see like developer rating scheme coming out and the Queensland Renewable Energy Code that's being worked on up north. I'm hopeful that this is a way for developers to really go, right, we're going to lead by example and actually deliver better practice on all fronts. And perhaps the ones that are sort of in it not for the long haul will drop by the wayside. And I hope that that's for the betterment of both regions and the environment. But I think from a messaging perspective, I would really like to see more independent and led by the regions. And again, this is something that Realliance has been involved in with the network of regional leaders that they're focusing on at the moment, where they can help empower these local trusted voices, which you can have fact sheets from your business, but there's obviously bias connected to that. But how can we have independent and trusted voices to actually to speak to communities and address the fact that, okay, not every project is going to get approved and not every project is going to be appropriate, but there are absolute benefits in the cohabitation, I guess, with agri-solar and I say agri-wind for farmers and succession planning and that sort of thing. I think neighbour programs, we're constantly looking at how to improve and uplift those. And again, we're here talking about community benefit and also just planning for resilience. So yeah, the climate comments are probably very important because we're all feeling them.
Yeah, thanks, Martine. Getting lots of good questions. I'd love to address them all, but I'm probably not going to be able to. I'll try to tie them in as best I can. Kerry, I just wanted to come to you and get your thoughts on how do you overcome these challenges that we're talking about, and are there strategies that you found that work well?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I was interested in Martine's comment about a pilot program because we've had one at Pallant now working for about 3 to 4 years that does actually test some of those initiatives as well, just to understand that we don't have a cookie cutter approach. So there's not one community which is exactly like another one, and it gives us the opportunity to tailor some of our initiatives. So I was really interested to hear that one, Martine. But I think some of the things that we're thinking about is considering that as an industry as a whole, we need to shift away from that short-term dollar-based branding focus or transactional approach to community investment and align those things to more what communities are experiencing or what may be needed, and also the stage that the projects are at. And again, that's going back to not always delivered just in construction, but looking at the planning elements, the delivery during construction, that also then leads to legacy. I think we also need to understand that not every area we're going into is going to have the same level of experience with infrastructure development. So some areas that I know that I work in, they have had a lot of other energy infrastructure projects. They're very experienced and very knowledgeable and understand how these processes can work. The next door local government area has not had much experience or many programs or projects in that area, and however we're crossing both. So it's just understanding, getting those insights of communities to see where they are in that spectrum of experience, and then work through your planning elements to start thinking about, well, what do we need to do to consider some uplift to enable better participation? How can we work through enhancement opportunities so that when we're delivering some community benefits that they've actually been well thought of? I think reflecting what Carla was saying about budgeting as well, that we've actually just gone on that journey ourselves and just looking at complexity of projects, the landscape and where they are, some of the impacts that might be occurring different. So again, not the cookie cutter approach. And then working out when to deliver different elements of that community investment. So release things early on a budget so we can do some planning, and that uplift and enhancement is actually a legacy can be built into some of those construction activities. Thinking about accommodation solutions, that we could just do an accommodation solution that fits the project, or we could uplift or enhance accommodation solution that at the end of our projects we can leave something in legacy. So think about building in uplift and legacy earlier would also be of great value. I think also using the early time that we can to investigate other things. So getting that community and co-design impact and input that Martine was talking about. Pallant now has TEEP, which is the transmission early engagement process. It has as a major component a factor in there called community insights. And that's where we actually are out in communities. We're getting that knowledge, we're getting the input, getting the insights, understanding the individual needs of the communities and really understanding some of the impacts that they may be experiencing or what might be required to help for that sustainable development to occur. And using that then to inform what we do during construction. I was really interested again, Martine, in agri-solar and agri-wind. I call it agri-energy. It's something that I've been looking at in particular. But again, how does that work with individual or collective farming activities or individual property holders to say, how can we actually co-design some of our activities to enable the renewable development or what we have to provide in the transmission infrastructure to support that? How can we make sure that we're not just coming in and building and then leaving? How can we make sure that we're working with you so that the agri-energy component, agriculture and energy will work together for the long term so that we can continue to maintain and operate the network and that landholders and communities can continue to maintain and farm or do other agricultural activities that complement so they're not disruptive to each other. And then I think the other thing we've been thinking of is that with the rapid rise of all these projects, there's going to be grant saturation very quickly occurring. So it's not just us, there's other activities, there's other projects, and they're going to be overlapping. They're going to be at a different point of time. They're going to be in a different space. They're going to be at a different stage or different level of complexity, as Carla was just mentioning. So we need to think of different ways and different strategies to develop and to manage those impacts as well. And I know we've been thinking of one that we've identified that there's some gaps in connectivity and communication in some of the regions where we've got our network. And we also then realised, well, it's not just a dollars and cents equation, it's what can we actually do that adds value? So what are the strategies that we can employ that adds value to the regions as well? We have fibre optic cables on the top of our infrastructure, and there was spare capacity in there. So we were able to start thinking of how can we use our subsidiary company QCN to deliver communication solutions or opportunities to the regions using the capacity that we can bring. So thinking outside of the box as well is one of the strategies that we're employing.
Great, thanks, Kerry. Again, I have lots of questions that I could draw in. One that I might along the line, a little bit about what you were saying, Kerry, but someone has said, do the panels see benefits in generating more oversight committees or collective advisory groups that comprise of transmission developers? Oops, hang on, it moved. Where'd it go? Transmission developers. Oh, it might have been removed. Anyway, the question was essentially, I guess it's around that collective impact and could there be, advisory groups within an area, particularly as we're developing reses in certain areas and things like that. Have you got any thoughts on that, Kerry, while you've got the mic?
Yes, I think there's some challenges and opportunities with both. I mean, we're all very aware of consultation fatigue. And if you've got 20 developers or 20 activities occurring and you're being engaged 20 times to talk about 20 different benefit programs, it can be very tiring. I think there needs to be a real thoughtful process and, that longer term strategic view that it's consolidated so we actually get some really good informed data to help make some of these decisions, and some of the collective panels potentially would need to have right from grassroots level and the community leaders through to stakeholders and industry as well to deliver something that's got value. I'm just mindful that there's a lot of engagement consultation that has to happen as well, as then if you want to look at benefits consultation, operational consultation, I think people get very fatigued really quickly. So I think if some careful consideration would be really required to develop those consultative committees or consultative groups that can help inform on that broader regional level.
I would probably just, highlight that just really speaks to the need for renewable energy to be collaborating and coordinating with transmission. I certainly know that when I was in Central West Orana Res, you had a landholder saying, "Oh, the people from the wind farm are here," and it wasn't. It was someone from Energy Co. And so optically, it's important to be collaborating as much as possible, but and sharing and trying to kind of coordinate some of that information sharing, because it's going to all be somewhat complementary, and then try and address some of these issues collaboratively as well. So yeah.
Right, thanks. There's one other question maybe in the group that I wouldn't mind asking, and maybe Carla, you could chat about this one. The question is, there are opposing drivers between the urgency of the renewable energy transition and the time that it takes to collaborate with community stakeholders locally impacted by the assets. How do we effectively manage the impacts and the concerns of those locally impacted over the broader societal impacts and risks of not meeting our renewable energy commitments and overall decarbonisation of our grid? As this person says, it's a wicked and emotive challenge, but a reality that our current transition is probably a bit too slow, and how do we deliver these assets faster, noting that not all stakeholders will be happy?
Yeah, it is a really good question. It is a key challenge, the timing. Yeah, and what obviously, the conversation around the renewable energy zones is not new. It has been in the political landscape for quite a while. Even I have found documents back to 2010 where there were discussions, and even you can find maps from 2010 with all these renewable energy areas that we are now putting forward towards implementation. But unfortunately, back then, there wasn't that engagement with communities about where these renewable energy zones are going to be located. And the opportunity now, I guess, as we see these renewable energy zones to be rolled out, is working on this early engagement. And we still see, projects that are in early stages of project design, and they're not engaging with communities because of this dilemma of, when is it too early? They're going to ask me questions. I don't have an answer. I don't know if my project is going to go ahead or not. I don't have funding secure for my next stage. So how can I be talking with communities if I don't know if my project is going to be going to go ahead? So that's where this collaborative approach and government as well play a significant role in seeding the path forward with early engagement and consultation, and communities as well. They understand that not every single project is going to go ahead, and that there's different phases of development of a project. But definitely, I think that it is important as early as you can as a developer to start having those conversations with your key stakeholders, local councils, with community, with other actors or industry in the territory, and get an understanding of what are the conversations that have been held in the past, and what are the community aspirations, their needs. I think that's a good starting point. But yeah, obviously working with communities and developing sustainable legacies takes time. Yeah.
Thanks, Carla. And just picking up something someone put in the chat, that countries globally are dealing with this. And I guess, Carla, while you're there, there are other experiences abroad that would be useful for Australia to consider. That might lead us into our next question too. So my question to you is, are there particular countries that you think we should be looking for inspiration for developing new approaches around this for Australia, or any things that Australia should learn from any of the research that you've done, Carla?
I think that in the energy space, and I know that people in government and the energy charter and industry as well, we're all looking at what has been done elsewhere and what has proven successful and not successful. Europe has provides some really good learnings about how developers have addressed some of the challenges. But I guess a key learning is something that both Martine and Kerry have touched already, is that we need place-based solutions, solutions that come from communities and from the local stakeholders, because context is just so important. The views of the communities are so important to navigate the challenges. And what I can do, share some specific examples of my experience in Chile. As some of you might know, Chile is one of the world's largest producers of copper. And we have had mine sites operating for over 100 years, and with a strong process of co-location of other mining operations, but also renewable energy projects, all in the same place. So all the complexity, cumulative impact, and this coordination about impact management, but also sustainable legacies. I have seen it through the lenses of another industry. And basically, when I just started, I remember when I was allocated the benefit sharing funds for the mine. One of the key concerns of the team that I used to work, my leadership, was not creating white elephants. And because I never been to this area, to this mining district before, and to this community before, I couldn't really grasp what they were meaning by white elephants until I saw one. And I understood, wow, this is what they mean by not living white elephants. And basically it's just community infrastructure projects that are being abandoned, they're not being in use, they've been vandalized. So there you have all this investment, time, resources that went into the project, but then years later, it's not being used, it's not delivering the outcomes that they were expected. And researching with communities of what happened with these assets, why they're not being in use, and I can share some of the learnings from that particular experience. So the approach that it was used at the time is that most of those projects were only discussed with the leadership of the community, just with specific representatives from community. They were not put up as a conversation or in dialogue with the whole of the community. So it was very important for the projects that we develop in the future to ensure that there was a broad-based understanding, and that those projects that we were going to invest on, they were built from the broader community as well. The other issue we identify is that when we were going to ask to communities what projects we can implement in the future, or how would you like to see this benefit sharing program being used, we were receiving a supermarket list of projects. We need this, we need this, we need this, we need this. There was not a focus on what are our strengths, what are our assets, what do we have to contribute to the development of this project, or what is the long-term vision of our community? What is it that we want to develop in our community for the future?
So Carla, can I ask, is that so you're drawing from the mining industry really, and applying some of what you've learned there? Sorry, was there a final point that I?
Yes, so basically those were some of the two key learnings, but also the importance of have knowledge about these approaches. So there is approaches for community development, and having people that knows how to facilitate these conversations and make sure that you are looking at the whole life of a project is very important.
Lovely, and a good skill if you can make that happen. Can I ask also, so along those lines of learning from other industries and a holistic sort of view of the project to enable longer term legacy. It's important to consider how to best coordinate these benefit sharing programs. We have touched on it a little bit, but so that they work in harmony, so that we're pooling resources, we're reducing the burdens and the fatigue for communities. If we think of, offshore wind on Gippsland, there's lots and lots of projects there, and small communities are going to be re-engaged on multiple projects, as an example. Martine, can you tell us how, from your perspective, that you think how we can better coordinate for the delivery of benefit sharing initiatives to ensure the best outcome for communities and avoid this sort of duplication?
Yeah. Well, I think sort of might be more of a summary, because I feel like we've touched on a fair few of
Yeah, we have.
What I might reiterate here sort of speaks to the first question as well, in terms of better understanding and supporting communities' development goals. And Kerry's point around, it's not a one size fits all approach. I really like to think of, it's when looking at your pre-construction and construction and obviously operational budgets for benefit sharing, it's more around, community resilience and what that investment can support for the longer term, which we've already talked about. Because actually regional Australia is coming up against so many challenges at the moment. Like, you in a small town, maybe there'll still be a post office, which is also a bank and maybe a pharmacy as well. And so there's no regional banks. There's maybe one cop in town, maybe there's one doctor, or and certainly kids who have learning difficulties are facing challenges. So there's all these areas where you can work to provide to fill a gap, I think, because we need to sort of remember that this isn't about filling in the role of government here, but trying to address some of these needs through filling in gaps. And so I think, a good starting point, again, it's obviously addressing, consulting and engaging with council and community groups, and then you can determine, I guess, where is best to place your efforts for defining and delivering benefit sharing initiatives. And I think, we talked about advisory groups before and whether or not they might be needed. And I think communities already have, one thing they're very, very good at is talking to each other. And a lot of these committees that do exist, and notably, they're full of people who are generally civic minded and very active in their community. But they manage facilities, they manage services, and they put that money back into their community. So there's absolutely administration vehicles that exist through some of these groups, that then doesn't see that there's duplicate efforts or administrative burden applied to council. It could be something that's sort of managed outside. But yeah, I think participatory budgeting, it's a method that's been tried and tested globally, and it's really successful in empowering people in seeing actually that they've made an impact in being part of a process. And I'd like to see that method applied more. And I think we're beginning to with co-design, but I think where reses are concerned, I think where communities are feeling the most kind of anxiety is that they're concerned that funds aren't going to actually get to them in those operational years. Certainly there's the work that developers can do up front and design as much as they can for legacy.
Lovely. Thanks, Martine. I'd really love to thank our panellists, Kerry, Martine and Carla. As I say, we thank you very much for attending today. We hope that you found the discussion really very interesting. Thank you. Thanks for coming.